All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you guys and talk to you a little more about our story and the tech behind USA Swimming's website that we help them with for the Olympics. My talk is not going to be about AI, so break with that a little bit. But I'm really excited to talk to you about something that's fundamental to every website that usually gets set up front, forgotten, and then when there's an issue, it becomes a big deal. So I'm hoping that you can walk away today with some ideas of what you can do when you have a similar problem. So let's see how this thing works. So as Sarah said, my name is Michael Daoud. A little background on me. I'm the founder and CEO of Visis. We're a digital consultancy in Santa Barbara, California. We are a Progress Sitefinity partner and champion, and 2 weeks ago became a solution designated partner for Microsoft, which is pretty cool, in digital app innovation and AI. So let's get started. So in today's world, digital world, speed defines success, right? So we keep talking about AI and driving traffic and things like that. And so how do you deliver content at scale to support a heavy traffic load, right? That's what we're gonna get into today. So a little overview before we get into the details of what I'm gonna walk you through. I'm gonna go over the objective of digital marketing, right? We'll talk about the 2021 Tokyo Challenge. So then what was the 2024 Paris objective? How do you get ready for that? And what are some fundamentals? I'll go over some basics. It might be familiar to many of you that are on the technical side, but for those that are not, I think it'll help paint the picture. And then we'll go over the strategy of what we did and the results of that. So let's dive in. So what's the objective of digital marketing, right? It's all about driving traffic. Maybe all is too large of a term, but it's about driving traffic to the website, right? That's the fundamental asset that every company has, that you're spending money on email campaigns, AdWords, whatever it is, LinkedIn. It's to bring people to the website, and as others said earlier, to also then convert them. So the website's got to be fast loading. It's got to be mobile friendly, easy to navigate. And as I said, converting visitors to leads leads to customers. Super, super important. So a lot of attention is given to that. But then what do you do when people need to come to the website? So I thought I'd share some stats with you. So fast loading times are critical to a website. From some research I did, it seems that 40% of people will leave a website if it doesn't load in less than 3 seconds. And if it's a mobile user, it's close to 50%. So think about that, right? You're driving traffic to your site and your site is slow, not even crashing or very, very, giving you errors, just slow. 40 to 50% of the people are gonna go elsewhere or abandon it. So let's take, for example, you have 1,000 people come to the website. Somewhere between 400 and 500 are not gonna show up if your site is taking more than 3 seconds to load. So start extrapolating that. You have 10,000 visitors. Earlier today, or I think it was yesterday, Peter was sharing about the Sitefinity Cloud has 1 million page views annually. That translates to about 83,000 visits per month. If you have a slow loading website, over 40,000 people are not gonna be showing up. And when you're talking about leads and conversion, like 5 to 10%, that's a massive number. And you gotta keep that in mind. So now you go up to hundreds of thousands to millions, that number becomes bigger and bigger. So it's a super important thing to keep in mind. And a lot of times, like I said, it's set up at the beginning, it's an afterthought. But you gotta think about how much are you driving in terms of traffic, what are you spending? Because all that AdWord money, all that LinkedIn money, all the social media, that goes to waste if only 40 to 50% of the people can get to your site. So it gets to be an expensive proposition. So when I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking about physical world patients, right? How many of us have waited in line for hours for things, maybe when we were much younger, for concerts, right? Lying around the block, waiting for the new iPhone, or restaurants. We have patients in the physical world. I remember being in Hawaii with my family a few years ago, and the hotel recommended a ramen place. And we went there, and the line was around the block, around the corner. It was like an hour and a half. And this is not like a tableside service place. You pick up your ramen bowl at the counter, go eat it. So it's like a 20-minute, 25-minute deal. And people were willing to wait 2 to 3 times as long as that experience just to do that. However, in the digital world, it's completely the opposite. Nobody has patience, right? Hands get thrown up in the air, people get frustrated, they want their stuff fast. That website has to load fast. And we're trained, right? We're trained to expect things to go fast in technology. We're being sold the latest iPhone that has a fast processor. I was talking to Lino yesterday, that was this thing he told me. It's like, oh, it's a lot faster, the iPhone 17 than the old one, right? Or the latest laptop, whatever you might have it, whatever gadget, it's about speed. And so we extend that speed also in the digital world in our experience. So that's a high bar to have. So I want to talk to you about the 2021 Tokyo Challenge. So you had Olympic swimmers in the pool at the Tokyo Olympics. And by the way, that's not a typo. The Olympics were set to be in 2020, but with COVID, it got pushed to 2021. When we first did our success story, I'm like, did our writer get it wrong? But it's right. But you have people swimming in the pool, and then the fans, the media, members of USA Swimming, they have a large member base, right? With trial times, all kinds of data. Couldn't get to the website. It wasn't loading. And in fact, I think at some points it crashed. And so imagine that experience of how to serve that data up at such an important time, right? But with every challenge, there's a gift. That's my belief in life. And so I think from that grew the gift of how do you get yourself set up for 2024 in a good way and deliver a successful experience to everyone that's coming to the website. So our objective in 2024, or USA Swimming's objective, was to prepare the website for high traffic. So we started working with USA Swimming. We touched base around 2021 at some point, but started really working on this thing in 2023 to think about it. And really success was defined by scalability, supporting millions of visitors, fast load times through speed, and then agility, because they were posting updates and news, and they needed to get to the back end as well, right, to make that happen. So that was our objective, and those were our marching orders, and we literally had 90 days to implement it before the Olympic trials. So it was a lot to do. So I wanted to go over some server fundamentals, right? And I'm amazed, there's still a lot of companies still with on-prem stuff, right? Not in the cloud. And so typical web servers have two main components. You've got the front end for the pages, you got the back end for the database, right? And they're both usually served from one server, right? You set up a box, your IT person sets up the box, and then you load up your website, it's got the database in it, and it's doing everything, right? And so with that, you have limitations. And those are physical limitations on the size of the box. There's only so much power that it has. And so you have a lot of traffic and you go beyond its processing power, the box is not going to respond. In fact, we had a customer that had a lot of entertainment shows back in the day, and they still do. And we set them up on one of the national hosting providers. This is pre-cloud. And on one day, they decided to sell tickets to both Santana and Seinfeld. And as big as that web server was, it could not handle the traffic. And so think about that. A lot of ticket sales and people getting frustrated and have to figure out how to get the, not a good situation. So we're super thankful for the cloud because it helps us solve a lot of those problems. So I wanted to go into cloud fundamentals and how that changes things. Right? So we talk about a physical box and its limitations and what it can do. So in cloud, you have basically two types, IaaS and PaaS. IaaS stands for infrastructure as a service, and PaaS stands for platform as a service. So infrastructure as a service, think of a virtual machine, you probably heard that word, VM. Someone needs to manage that server, right? It's an operating system, disk space that has the latest patches, security updates, all that stuff. Think about that box that was in the on-prem system and now just basically shifted up to the cloud to be managed there instead of your own data center. But it still has its own physical limitations in many ways. But then the exciting part of the cloud is to go over to platform as a service, which, by the way, Progress also offers through Sitefinity Cloud. And there, the provider manages the operating system, the middleware, the storage, the updates, all that stuff. So if you're in PaaS on Microsoft, Microsoft's managing that platform. You're plugging in your code, hitting a button to turn on a database without installing anything, and you're live, right? And it's beautiful. And the better part is that it has auto-scaling rules, right? Which makes it elastic. So anybody remember Stretch Armstrong? Yeah. So think of it as a Stretch Armstrong for a server box, right? The thing is elastic like Stretch Armstrong. It can grow and shrink as needed with traffic. And that's a really, really nice thing. So the more traffic you have, the more resources are added to the surge when the traffic happens. And so it's really nice from that end. And so that way, the other benefit of it is that you're only paying for the computing power that you need at the time. So in the old ways, when you had a big box, so when we had that one client that had the Santana, they were doing shows all the time, we sized them up with a large box to handle traffic when it happened a couple times a year. Obviously, for that day, it wasn't big enough. And so what you're doing is paying for a big box up front that's only going to use that power when it's needed during those few days. It's like buying a car with a V12 and driving it at 45 miles an hour on average and really not getting that power out of it. So PaaS flips that flips it upside down. You're paying only for normal traffic every day, and you're only paying for premium traffic when it happens. And that's a really cool thing, because then you're like, why am I going to pay for so much computing power when I don't need it, except for maybe during the Olympics, it's maybe a couple of months during that year. And so that's a beautiful part about it, is that it's efficient, but also very effective too with auto-scaling. So let's dive into the strategy that we took to work with the USA Swimming team to get them ready for 2024. So the strategy was to upgrade the website, and I'll go into all these in more detail, leverage ASP.NET Core Renderer, migrate from on-prem to cloud, setting up caching, and then doing load testing. So the first part of the strategy was upgrading the site. At the time, I think they were on Sitefinity version 13.3. We went up to 15.1. That was what was available right before the Paris Olympics. And that was a huge thing, right? We come across customers all the time on Sitefinity that don't want to upgrade. And if, my message to any customer that doesn't want to upgrade, I keep telling them, you're paying for renewals, you're losing on the features and new enhancements. And just by taking the USA Swimming 15.1, unlocked a lot of things. So it was new features, new enhancements, new security updates, but it also unlocked the .NET Core renderer for us, which was beautiful because if you know anything about it, it's super high performing and very lightweight. So that was a big, big deal to be able to do that. And that was not available in 2021 when they already had the website. So unlocking that was big. And so then we went to leveraging the 3-tier architecture for Sitefinity. And so in that, we had tier 1, which is the database, right? It was split up in its own tier. Sitefinity CMS, the backend where you make the updates, in tier 2. And tier 3 is where the .NET Core renderer lives for the pages. So you're serving out pages using .NET Core, which is extremely fast, and it could be on its own for the front end. So that was a big deal because now you can separate the computing resources too amongst these 3 different tiers really nicely. So one of the nice gifts that came out of the 15.1 upgrade. So then we leveraged ASP.NET Core Renderer, and from that, it allowed us to decouple the front end from the back end to create that new lightweight front end. And we then reproduced a subset of the page templates that they had and existing custom widgets for use within the rendering engine. And so with that, it really allowed us to start separating things, right? The front end can live somewhere, the back end can live somewhere else. We can have multiple front ends being served at the same time, talking to the back end. A lot of flexibility from that old monolithic model where you had everything in one box and you're kind of limited to that. So then, continue with the .NET Core renderer. Since we only had a 90-day runway to get things ready, there was another gift that was in there, in that the .NET Core renderer does not require you to upgrade the entire website at the same time every page. And that's a huge thing, right? It's huge from a timing thing. It's huge from a budgetary thing, right? You don't have to say, oh, I'm going to go wholesale, take 6 months, and just run really hard to get the whole thing converted. So that was a beautiful gift, because then we worked with the USA Swimming team and identified what are the most traffic pages on the site, because we didn't have much of a runway to get it ready. So we picked the 5 most trafficked pages, which was a home page, the events, the event details where people were getting data, the videos, and then news updates, the news detail page, right? So that was huge. And so we said, all right, we're going to take all these high traffic pages, prioritize them, and convert those to .NET Core, right? Everything else can still live on the CMS side. That was really, really big. So then, once we were doing that work of that conversion on those pages and the widgets, once that work was done, and in parallel, because EIC Swimming also has an internal IT team, they already had an Azure footprint. We set up instances in Azure, right? So we migrated from on-prem into Azure PaaS, right? PaaS is a nice word to remember. And then we created 2 app service plans for Sitefinity, one for the front end, one for the CMS, right? Remember, that's tier 2 and tier 3. And then one for Azure SQL Database. So they're all separate plans for that. And then we also set up CI/CD, which is a huge thing for iteration and being able to deploy code fast instead of the old manual way on a box. So that migration was really, really effective. And you know, that's the strategy is all about these things coming together. It just wasn't one thing that made it happen. So the next step was, in the migration to the cloud, then we wanted to make sure that the auto-scaling rules are there. So if any of you are not familiar with auto-scaling rules, it's really if-then statements. When you go to Azure, you could say, okay, if my processor goes over 80%, add another instance. If my memory goes over 80%, add more memory. And you can have multiple instances that happen that way. And then you can put opposite rules and say, if my traffic drops below that, then drop an instance. So you're not paying premium once it gets pegged to the top. So it's beautiful that way. So we went in there and implemented the auto-scaling solution to handle those spikes. And then we leveraged Redis cache, but we also worked with the USA Swimming team that had set up Fastly caching to cache more pages for additional speed, right? So when you cache, you have pages already saved on a server, served up, and whatever geographic location you're at, you can get a page served up faster that hasn't changed since the server got updated. So, all right. So then the last piece of the strategy was load testing. And again, that's where we collaborated with the USA Swimming team to load test. It's hard to load test for millions of users, but at least you can start with thousands to tens of thousands, right, to try it out. And that was an important, at least, litmus test to say, are things going to be supported when we go live? And so we collaborated with them, and that load testing looked really good. And that gave us the confidence that we were ready to go. And all that's, keep in mind, this is in 90 days, right? That's a nice run. And there was a lot that got done during that time. So here are the results. And they were really cool results to see. So when the Olympic trials and the Paris Olympics took place last year, they had millions of visitors. And I can't disclose what that number is, that's proprietary, but it was millions, just think of millions, right? No outages and 0 crashes. Really good. Speaks to the platform, Sitefinity, speaks to Azure, and speaks to how the whole thing was put together. So they had an 84% increase in users over 2021. That's massive. And more than double in website sessions. So imagine being a fan, having experienced something in 2021 that didn't serve you right, and being in 2024 and getting what you need. Just, it's kind of like what Derek was talking about, right? You feel like, okay, I'm getting the right service, I'm getting the data that I need. Because it's all about, it's reflective on the brand, the experience, and all that. And it's exciting to be able to get what you need when you need it, especially in the digital world. So that was huge. A little more on the results. Should have made my transitions a little faster. But we're able to maintain fast load times during multi-day events. So typically, like the Seinfeld Santana thing that I shared with you guys, that's usually a 2-3 day peak, people buying traffic, and it goes down. Here, you're talking like at least 30 days, right? Olympics are happening, events are happening, so you have to be able to maintain that level of service. And so at the end, fans, members, and the media are getting all the results that they want and having a flawless experience accessing key information. And that was a huge win, you know. I was so happy to hear that. And, you know, I think the best takeaway that I got from it in speaking with one of the team members over at USA Swimming was, his comment to me was, there was nothing to talk about at the board meeting this year. And that was cool, right? Because everything went smooth and as needed. So in summary, I'll go over some of the things. So just like races are won by speed in the Olympics, so are user experiences in the digital world, right? We got to keep that in mind. We're all talking about traffic, and I don't know, Derek, you had like 15,000 marketing tech tools that people can use to drive traffic, but you got to think of the fundamentals too. What's your website standing on? Is that foundation strong enough, right? And you got to look at the analytics, and you know, some of it is guesswork, but you got to make sure you're sized up right, because you do a big campaign, people flood and they can't get to it, and you lose 40 to 50% of it. That's not successful. That's not good. So I think, you know, if I were to have you walk away with a takeaway of what made this happen, it's upgrading the CMS, right? Super important to stay up to date with the latest improvements. I know Sergey and his team worked really hard on all the latest features, updates, enhancements. Leveraging .NET Core Renderer was a huge thing. Cloud scalability from Azure. Caching is very, very big. We still come across customers that don't even use CDN, and it's such an important piece, right? And being able to deliver all that in a solid platform and experience for the visitors is awesome. So I hope you can walk away. If you have a need to think about something like that, at least you have the structure, the recipe of what it takes. And when you do it right, it works really well. Thank you all. If you're interested in the success story, you can get it here from this QR code, and I'm available for questions by email or in person later. Appreciate all your attention.
You talked about the .NET Core Renderer and the decoupled front end and back end. So what specifically was USA Swimming able to do content-wise because of that? Like you mentioned events and various things. Was there more content going out? I mean, I understand the performance and the simplicity behind it, but I'm just curious if it also impacted productivity in other ways.
That might be a better question for Mariah or Patrick to answer who are here. But I think, you know, would you like to answer part of that? Productivity-wise?
Hey everyone, Patrick Murphy, USA Swimming. I am not on the content side. I'm more on the tech and data side, but we really were able to actually push content, which we could not in 2021, and that was really the main difference, if anything.
Yeah, but being able to update the backend, right? So they collect a lot of data, right? And that data needs to get pumped out to the website for people to see the trial times. But they're also updating news, you know, who won a gold medal, things like that. And so all that, you know, when you have a fast-running website versus slow-running website, provides efficiencies, you know, allows you to get your information out faster.
So you kind of mentioned the hybrid approach where you kept the CMS with the MVC renderer, but then migrated like the top 5 pages. I'm assuming that's what you meant.
Yeah. And
so were there any other areas when we talk about migration, and anybody that's here that might still be on like an earlier version, do you have any other tips or tricks when it comes to migration that would be helpful when you're trying to put together a strategy for your migration? Because that was a good one.
You know, it always comes down to, in the migration, to how much customization do you have? Can those customizations be dealt with some out-of-the-box features that are available now, right? We're doing that a little bit with the USA Swimming team right now. There are some early customizations that another partner did years ago. And we're leveraging some things out of the box to make it faster and easier to migrate, right? But really, I think my biggest message with the .NET Core Renderer, when people go there, you can say, okay, I'm going to budget X amount of time and dollars per month, and I'm going to take a year. If there's, you know, if the traffic on a lot of these pages is not of concern, then you can take your time and budget it appropriately versus cram it all in a short amount of time and try to get it all done wholesale.